Rusty Humphries Show.
Hey, welcome back. It is the Rusty Humphries Show. That phone number is 1-800-449-TALK, 1-800-449-8255. TalkToRusty.com, of course, is the website. If you listened to my broadcast when I was in Washington, D.C., for example, you probably heard this next guest. She's very intelligent. She's very nice. She has a number of things out there, including she is the executive director of the Edmund Burke Institute for American Renewal. Dr. Grace, welcome back to the Rusty Humphries Show. How are you?
I am well. Thanks, Rusty, for having me on.
Let's go back to a history lesson just for a second, and that is Edmund Burke. Edmund Burke is somebody that conservatives should have a better knowledge of. Obviously, you named your institute after Edmund Burke. Why? Why is he so important?
Well, he's actually the founder of the modern conservative movement, and I think that we need to go back to those core principles. So that's why I named the institute after him. And also, in the 18th century, he was one of those individuals that was really ahead of his time in the sense that he said, for example, the British should treat the people in their colonies very well, whether they are white-skinned or brown-skinned, etc. So he was really a man ahead of his time. So he was able to uphold conservative values while tailoring those values to the needs of the day. And so the challenge that I'm presenting to everybody is, listen, we need to uphold our conservative values, but we also have to find creative ways to apply them to the contemporary challenges. And that's why I called it the Edmund Burke Institute for American Renewal.
Now, there's a lot of people who, in the college areas, for example, professors would say liberalism or progressivism is about being progressive, about moving forward. All conservatives want to do is look backward. And are you proving that by looking back to a guy like Edmund Burke?
Well, I think that's just such a caricature of who we are. Listen, conservatives have always said we have enduring principles, but those principles always have to be applied to the challenges of our time. If you look at Christianity itself, you know, the moral code that we rely upon, it is a code that goes back centuries, and yet every Christian has to apply it to the challenges of the day. And it is the same thing with conservatism. Instead, let me say this. One of the things that Edmund Burke said himself, he said that anything that doesn't change dies. You know, if a philosophy doesn't change and evolve, it dies. And it is the same thing with conservatism. So we have these core values, and we must find ways, creative ways, original ways, dynamic ways to make them exciting for every new generation. And that's what I'm trying to do with the Edmund Burke Institute.
Okay, so then, Dr. Grace, if we're trying to make conservatism more exciting for the next generation, does that mean we embrace things like abortion and higher taxes and more freebies for everybody because that's just the direction we've been in so many years?
Absolutely not. The point is we've got to retain the values, the core values that have made America great, that have made the West great, the core values of our Christian heritage, the core values of our capitalist heritage, the core values of our democracy. So we've got to uphold those things. But on the other hand, we have to find ways to adapt them. So one of the things that I specialize in is, let's look at the demographics. We see, for example, that we have a burgeoning Hispanic population here. We have minorities and women. These, unfortunately, they tend to vote quite a lot for liberal candidates. So one of the challenges I present to the American people is to say, listen, we have these values, they're amazing values, but we're going to be shut out of the public square unless we find creative ways to sell these values to Hispanics, to blacks, to women, because especially as demographics change and the white population becomes a minority, unless conservatives do that, our values will disappear from America.
Okay, but
so
are you
one example.
Okay, let me ask you this, Dr. Grace, here on the Rusty Humphries Show, EdmundBurkeInstitute.org. Are you falling into the trap of liberalism in that where they judge everybody based on the color of their skin? I mean, you brought up a bunch of different colors and races. I don't care what color somebody is. I just care if they're a good person or not.
Yeah, I don't care either, but we have to face the facts. This is not a matter of judging anybody. It's just saying this. Look at the way that blacks vote. There's no question about it. 80 to 90% consistently vote for liberal candidates. Hispanics, they tend to be swing voters, but they tend to vote more for Democrats and liberals than they do for conservatives. These are facts. We have to face these facts. Women, too, they tend to be more sometimes swing voters. They'll, for example, the soccer moms helped George Bush get elected, but they tend to swing also towards the Democrats. If we don't educate these groups, if we don't make specific attempts to say, let me tailor my policies, my speech, so that it appeals to you, we're not going to get very far. In the long run, we're going to lose a sense of what conservatism is. And you know what? I have to say, unless we actually are very, very vigilant, conservatism, there's no doubt about it, it's going to gradually disappear as the Caucasians become a minority. If we don't change this trend, we're going to be in big trouble. So what I'm saying is, I'm sounding the alarm bells. It's not about saying that somebody deserves special privileges. It's just a matter of recognizing realities and tailoring our message to some audience. I'll give you an example. Look, let's say you want to speak to a female, you're trying to get, women to vote for a conservative candidate.
Okay.
Don't just repeat the same things that you would just say generically. Women, for example, you want to talk about an issue like crime. Conservatives are strong on crime, right? Why not incorporate a little bit into a speech about how specific policies might benefit women who fear crime? That's just a very small example of taking the core conservative values and recognizing that you got to pitch those values to a very changing, to an audience that is ever changing. I can tell you this. If I've never heard a politician say something as simple as, hey, you know what? There's a lot of women in the audience that love to run outside, and wouldn't you love to run in the evening? But the streets aren't safe enough for you to do that. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to try to make sure that you can have that same simple liberty as a man can. That's a very small thing, but what I'm trying to say is that you've got to recognize that different groups, minorities, they have needs, and those needs can be addressed by conservative policies. And the challenge that every conservative leader has is to say, how can I, make my tent really, really big? And the way to do that is to recognize that you can take your conservative values and find areas there that you will be able to broaden it by appealing to certain needs of certain communities and demographic groups.
Dr. Grace here on the Rusty Humphries Show. Her website, EdmundBurkeInstitute.org, EdmundBurkeInstitute.org. Dr. Grace is the executive director of the Edmund Burke Institute for American Renewal. We were talking about Dr. King and the idea of judging somebody based on the color of on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. You believe we are in a Great Depression, not the Great Depression financially, probably in a Great Recession, but you believe we're currently in a Great Depression of character. What do you mean?
Absolutely right. The biggest deficit that we face in this country today, Rusty, it is the character deficit. And that's why my latest piece is actually called that, the character deficit. The problem we have up and down our society is that there are too many corrupt people. We've got corrupt politicians on Capitol Hill, as we saw with the recent House Ethics panel, finding Democratic lawmaker Charlie Rangel guilty on 11 ethics violations. Maxine Waters is going to be on the dock soon. And it's not just Capitol Hill, Rusty. We've got a problem everywhere. Our financial sector is full of corruption. The FDIC is about to launch 50 criminal investigations into our banks.
Wow.
And when we look at our captains of industry, the greatest oil spill in our history, the BP oil spill, there's a report coming out saying that so many people who were involved were negligent, and that's what caused this giant explosion.
And I'll tell you something else that's lacking in character. They're making sure all of these reports come out after the election.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you just said.
I said one thing showing the lack of character in government, and that is they've allowed all of these reports to come out after the election.
Well, and that's not, you can't say that it's only the Democrats who proceed this way. Republicans have done that also. One of the things we saw was in 2006, the public said, we're tired of you corrupt Republicans, so they kicked them out. And now we have the same phenomenon in 2010 where the public is saying, we're tired of you corrupt Democrats.
Well, maybe it's just the people are too fickle.
No, the people are not too fickle. The people are correctly alarmed. We are really alarmed right now, and that's one reason why we're doing something really which is unprecedented. We're telling Congress, you know what, even after we elect you guys, we really don't trust you. And that's why we don't even want you to speak in control of earmarks. We're trying now more and more to place limits on what our elected leaders can do. And I think that's a healthy thing, because we are returning to some common sense, which is this: don't ever give anybody too much power. And that's what our founding fathers tried to tell us.